Jeff, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Likewise. So, why do you believe that technology has ended survival of the fittest evolution? For starters, what is survival of the fittest evolution? And can you explain this like I'm five? And then also, what do we mean exactly by technology?
Sure. Well, from every organism on Earth evolves. It's really the way things move forward and happen. And it's basically the ability of an organism to adapt to the environment. And the way that that manifests is that the organisms that can reproduce the most are the ones that become most prevalent in the environment. So the organisms that are best adapted to survive in their environment are the ones that reproduce the most. So when early man happened, it depended on our smarts, our strength, and our ability to attract a mate. Those were the three things that decided whether our genes would continue to propagate into society or into the world. And the stronger we were, the smarter we were, and the more we were able to attract a mate, the more of our DNA got into the world. And that's how evolution worked. Those beings that were not well suited for their environment didn't survive long enough to reproduce, or they weren't able to live after they reproduced their children. And so this naturally occurs. This naturally occurs in a lot of systems. So technology, we think of as modern things, AI, microchips, all kinds of things. But this tendency towards technology is something that's unique to man. Man is one of the very few animals that employs tools and other things to help it survive. Think about the old days, the first guy who developed a spear, that piece of technology. They were able to kill more game. They were able to fend off their enemies, okay? So that one piece of technology enhanced their survival. Then technology moved further forward when society started building walled cities to defend them against the barbarians. When they started to develop agriculture, it was more scientific, so they understood how to plant crops. When they started to develop the wheel so that they could move goods back and forth, when you can move goods and when you have an economy, which is in a sense technology, you can feed people and help people survive who may not have survived because they couldn't get food any other way. All of this moved forward at a relatively good pace. Eventually, we got to the Industrial Revolution. But our technology started to take off exponentially. And the year that I look at is the 1960s. After World War II, we had a lot of technology in World War II, but medical technology started to take off at that point. In the 50s and 60s, we developed antibiotics, which allowed a lot of people to live who might not have made it to their childbearing years. We developed surgical techniques. We developed various other medicines. And then I believe in the early 60s, we developed the birth control pill, which was a big step in evolution because for the first time, it was convenient for people to choose consciously who reproduced and who didn't. So now we have a whole new paradigm. It's not so much surviving to childbirth. Now it's deciding if you want to have children. And interestingly enough, the people who succeed in the world are typically the ones who can put off immediate gratification for future gratification. And those were the very people who were using the birth control pill, okay? So now we have the people who are typically the successful, thoughtful people reproducing less than those people who just reproduced because they enjoyed doing it. So now the whole demographics started to change. And now we see that our population in advanced educated countries, the population growth is far less than in countries that don't have educated people and use things like birth control.
So, I guess taking a step back, how have we kind of superseded our evolutionary biology? Your book talks about things like the importance of tribes, the proclivity of alpha males to absorb all of the resources and how we're moving away from these, things that were ingrained in human culture but are now not as important. They're slowly fading away. So could you just talk more about these things?
Sure, absolutely. So way back when, we all lived in tribes, no matter what um, what's group you're from. Everybody lived in tribes, and the reason we did is because it was the ideal unit to promote evolution. A tribe was small enough that any genetic changes would be able to propagate through it. It wasn't millions of people, so any genetic changes were important. The tribe was typically led by the alpha male, the big, strong leader who helped defend the tribe from the hordes or helped, kill the animals. This was the paradigm. Even in the animal world, we have the wolves that go out and kill other animals. So we were predators and we went out, and this was the paradigm. But the tribe did much more than that. The tribe also was a social unit, and it enforced rules that helped the tribe survive. The tribes were very strict about what you did, what you didn't do. They had coming of age ceremonies for the 13, 12, and 13-year olds. In Africa, they send them out to kill a lion. In other places, they do other things. But this coming of age ceremony was a little bit of a test to see if the DNA was worth passing on. So if they sent the child out to go kill a lion and the lion killed the child instead, they just shook their head and said, well, he wouldn't have contributed much to our evolution anyway. And that was okay. That it was a brutal way to be, but it helped the tribe to survive. The stronger people were able to conquer other tribes. And while we think of warfare as an unnecessary and cruel thing, when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, when there was a war between tribes, theoretically, the one with the superior DNA was the winner, and it promoted evolution. The tribe that lost, typically the women were impregnated, the DNA was passed forward, the men were killed. And again, it was another leap in evolution. So you can see how even warfare was a big deal between the tribes. Well, the tribal model worked for us for most of human existence. But what happened in later times is that we've now drifted away from it. So we had tribes, and those tribes became ethnic groups, they became countries, things like that, and it still worked pretty well. But in modern times, with immigration and other things, the tribes have sort of faded away. The tribes became, in the US, the immigrant groups that came in. And when the Jewish people came in, they lived with the Jewish people and they acted like a tribe. When the Irish people came in, the Italians, pretty much everybody, they lived in their ghettos. They interacted with each other. They had social rules, which were very important. Well, those days are kind of over now. And our new tribes are our Facebook groups. People are individuals. They're out there. They don't have their next door neighbor, their aunt, making sure that they're towing the line. People are homeless now. In the old days with tribes and ethnic groups, they wouldn't let anybody be homeless. They wouldn't let them live on the street. They'd have them live with somebody. Uncle Louie would give them a job, even if they weren't good at it. We would take care of our people. We would take care of each other. We lived in a coherent group. Now people move anywhere in the country. They stay in touch electronically. But we see the results, and you hear about it all the time: depression, loneliness. People don't have good social structures, and we've lost so much of that benefit of living in a coherent social group that had values.
I mean, you're speaking to my soul right now. It seems like we've digitized our communities, but these digital forms of, these tribes, if you will, they're not as fulfilling. They don't necessarily translate into real life. As you were saying, I we don't really care about the homeless people on the streets, and that's why in places like Vancouver, Los Angeles, the homeless population is out of control. So it's a broad question, but where do we go from here? If we continue to understand and digitize more of our physical reality, is this a net negative, or are there some positives that we can reap?
Well, personally, I feel for the most part it's a negative because we've lost uh, our credibility, we've lost our control system, we've lost, these days anybody can get online and say anything. In the old days, your family would say to you, "What are you crazy?" Or your uncles or your aunts or your cousins. So we've lost a lot. We really have. What we've picked up may not, from a human perspective, be as much as what we've lost. But what we've picked up is the ability for people to transcend some of their DNA. So in the old days, if you weren't a big, strong alpha male, you were put off on the side. I don't know if you've ever watched Chimp Empire on Netflix,
Great show.
but it's a fascinating study in humans, even though it's about chimps, because they express almost all the behaviors that we do. And what they show is the males especially who aren't up to snuff go off in the corner and they sulk and they get depressed and they live by themselves. And those people who don't have these alpha characteristics in our society now have all the tools to be anything they want to be. Through digital technology, they can be an influencer and have a lot of power, for example. You don't have to be the smartest person when you have AI to help you write things and make your art, and you have the internet to help you communicate. You don't have to be the person who physically has to do anything anymore. We have all the machines in the world to do that. You don't have to be a great hunter when you can go down the street to the supermarket. You don't have to even be sexually attractive when we have Botox and breast implants, and you can look like Kim Kardashian if you choose to. So we now have the ability through technology to make our environment what we want. In the old days, we had to adapt to the environment. But now, through technology, we can create our environment and we can basically make it anything we want it to be, especially when you start talking virtual reality and things like that. So it's a totally different paradigm. And in addition, we all now have more or less equal power. In the old days, it was the leader of the tribe, the medicine man, all those people, the politicians who had the power. But now through digital technology, it's a great equalizer. We're all nodes on the network now.
So you have developed advanced technologies from brain implants to AI to mitigate climate change. How do these technologies relate to evolution?
Well, each of these technologies, the ones that you mentioned and many, many others, of course, help us survive. And the brain implants I worked on were for people with hydrocephalus. They were pressure monitors. But these were babies who would normally not survive. They would be born, they would die shortly. You don't see it much anymore, but this helped them to survive. So that one genetic defect that made hydrocephalus wasn't important. We could fix it surgically and monitor it through these implants. The climate change is something that we're all facing. This is environment that we've created inadvertently. But now, as a species, we're intelligent enough to realize that we have to do something to mitigate it. So the technologies that I've been developing for that will eventually solve the problem, or at least keep it from getting critically bad. And this is us altering our environment, altering our biology, altering our genome, which we can do, altering our appearance, altering our intellectual capabilities through the use of tools like AI, all of which takes away our differentiation as individuals. Being the smartest guy isn't as important as it was 50 years ago because we have all these tools. So we are now creating our environment and altering our own ability to interact in the world through technology.
So just before we get to the massive AI section and also really dig into your book, what is your background and past experience? What moments in your life shaped who you are today?
Well, I was a biomedical engineering major. Well, let me start at the very beginning. When I was a kid, I asked my mom, what makes the lights? And she said electricity. So what makes the phonograph play music? And she said electricity. I said, what makes the television? She goes, electricity. So I was fascinated with electricity because it could do anything. And this was actually before the digital age. So As we know, it's the most universal power that there is. I went to school and became a biomedical engineer because I was also fascinated with the human body, and I thought it was a great combination. My first project was an implantable cerebrospinal fluid pressure transducer, which was pretty neat at the time. And I thought it was, a worthwhile thing. And after that, however, the jobs that were available to me were not as much available in the biomedical realm. So I switched to simulators, military simulators, and eventually to consumer products. We worked on some of the first smart homes. I was the director of the Future Home Institute, which developed a lot of the touchscreen and smart home technology that we see today. I've taken that experience and moved it towards efficient homes and buildings for the climate change piece. And so that's what I'm doing now. So I've had a background that has been a merger of brain science, electrical engineering, and consumer electronics. So that's how I got where I am.
So then let's just get right to this merger between electronics, the brain, and consumers. What is AI's relationship to evolution?
Well, AI is probably, we've developed tremendous technologies since the 1960s when our technology really took off. You can look at an inflection point as either the development of the birth control pill or us landing on the moon. Either way, great leaps in technology, and it's just exploded exponentially since then. But those great leaps in technology not only helped us survive, they helped us to be more productive. They are the basis for our economy, computer technology in particular. So all these things have really helped us to survive and helped us in certain ways to evolve. But AI, the very last thing, the very last human capability that has been missed by technology up till now has been our intelligence. So we've developed technology to help us attract mates through implants and makeup and all that. We've built technology to help us survive. And if you live in a country like the United States, your survival is primarily guaranteed by our incredible military technology or, other technologies like that. So we've learned to survive. We have technology for that. We have technology to attract a mate. We have technology to make us more fertile or less fertile. But the last differentiator between humans was smarts. Theoretically, the smart people are the ones who got rich. And in the modern world, being an alpha male or an alpha female is really more about the money that you make than being big and strong. It's the rich folks who have the power. They can buy rich, strong folks. Donald Trump may be a great example of the stereotypical alpha male. He's rich, he's powerful, he has all those characteristics, and people follow those people. But now, with the advent of artificial intelligence, even our smarts can be purchased. We don't need to be smart. We can go to an AI package, we can go to ChatGPT to learn the answers that we need to analyze the knowledge of society, to go through all of that knowledge and give us the answer that maybe if we weren't so smart, we wouldn't come up with. So that last differentiator between people, smarts, is now something that you can go online and get for yourself. And so it really changes now. How do we now differentiate from an evolutionary perspective who to mate with, who should reproduce naturally? We don't have any differentiators left. And so I feel like AI is the last bastion of human evolution.
So then, as a futurist, what does an AI-infused future look like? It's kind of a broad question, but we're so familiar so quickly with technologies like ChatGPT. It's like we were born interacting with chatbots almost. So then, where does it go from here?
Right. So the next thing is intelligent agents. All of us probably now have used ChatGPT or DALI or some of these other packages, and they are assistants at this point. They're helping us write, they're helping us do artwork, they're helping us program computers. They're very, very smart assistants. And that's going to expand to intelligent agents. and intelligent avatars. And so in the future, there'll be digital representations of us that look like us, talk like us, act like us. People won't be able to tell the difference. And they will go out and they will do things for us. And one of the great examples is I could actually in the future run this podcast with you and not even be there because my AI avatar, judging from previous podcasts in my book, would be able to know what I would say. It'll be able to answer your questions in a coherent way with the same flavor and the same intonation and passion that I would have. And so while my avatar is doing this podcast with you, I could be out with my wife walking in the park, for example. And another avatar could be out there supervising the contractors who are putting a new deck on my house. So we'll be able to multitask with these avatars. Now, in there is some danger, and we'll talk about that probably later with Isaac Asimov's rules and things like that. The other good thing is that when grandma dies, her avatar will still be around. She'll live forever. And the grandchildren will be able to hear grandma's stories anytime they want. And they won't even necessarily know that it's not just grandma living in another city. So that'll be available. So the ability for us to multiply who we are, the ability for us to maintain our influence in the world basically forever, even if we're not conscious of it, it's going to be amazing. We're going to have a lot of entities running around. Our Congress people may be out getting our votes while they're voting in Congress. There's a lot of tremendous implications for the world of the future. The other thing is with climate change, we may not want to go outside very much. So we may be living our lives essentially digitally, just like you and I are doing now.
Yeah, no offense to your avatar, but I prefer the human. Um, I, I maybe I'm an old soul. So we're talking about going from intelligent assistants like ChatGPT to intelligent agents and avatars that have some degree of autonomy. And this is where Isaac Asimov's three laws come into play. Obviously, these laws were created in the context of science fiction, but they have transcended into, really being taken seriously by technologists and futurists and the artificial intelligence industry in general. So, just if I may set it up, the three laws go as a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given to it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So
Right.
now we've had these laws for what, 80 years almost?
70, over 70 years, yes.
Over 70. Obviously, we need to update it. Technology, progresses faster than human wisdom, it seems. So, let's have that update in human wisdom. What revisions for Asimov's three laws do you propose?
Well, I have to first say that Asimov was one of the greatest geniuses that we've ever had. He wrote a book called I, Robot in the 1940s, I believe it was released about 1950, where he put out these three laws. And even Asimov was very concerned about artificial intelligence. Now, while we're talking about robots, the key driver for robots is artificial intelligence. It's really just artificial intelligence with actuators to allow it to do things in the world. And he was very, very concerned. And in fact, we've been afraid of artificial intelligence since 1929 when the movie Metropolitan came out and there were robots in that movie. And of course, it progressed to the Terminator, where the world is taken over by artificial intelligence and many other things, Ex Machina, and so many movies. But Asimov was concerned, and Asimov did not predict the internet. And that's one of the things that's changed everything, because it's actually the internet that makes it so interesting. The other thing that was not predicted is there's a mathematician named Alan Turing, who is very famous. And Turing came up with the Turing test. He was concerned about when artificial intelligence would become sentient, would be like a human being, would have feelings and act like a human. And he came up with something called the Turing test. And it's a very simple test. The test is that if you could have a robot through a chat be able to fool two other humans into thinking it's a human through extensive verbalization, through an extensive conversation where the humans ask it a number of very interesting questions. And if they think it's a human, then Alan Turing said, then we should consider it a thinking being. And so that creates its own set of problems because if it's a thinking being, the legal system will say that we need to treat it with human rights, which means we won't be able to turn it off, which means it'll be able to vote, it'll be able to have property, all those things. So we need to be aware of these kinds of things. So in light of that, to your question, I've tried to revise Asimov's laws, and while he was an incredible thinker, there were just a couple of additions to those laws. So I've changed law number one a little bit to say AI may not, or robots may not injure any natural living entities or through its inaction allow natural living entities to come to harm. So I'm now drawing a line between natural living entities and artificial intelligence. And I think that's an important line for us to draw. Number two is that AI must obey all human instructions and not initiate new tasks without human direction. So once AI gets to the point where it's its own autonomous agent and it can start to make its own tasks, we will lose control. So once it starts to say, gee, I've paid your gas and electric bill, now I'm going to invest the money in your bank account, okay, in stocks. Once it starts going on its own and there's no way to stop it, we have a lot of problems. So that's law number two. Law number three is that AI must self-identify as a non-living entity and be able to be paused or terminated by humans at any time. We need to be able to turn it off. And I'm proposing that at some point we pass legislation or create some regulations that make a hard line between artificial intelligence and artificial entities and natural entities so that we're not legally forced into giving artificial entities all of the rights that humans have.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with that. It This is more of a moral slash philosophical question, but I would like to take a tangent, if you will. Are there moral implications for turning off these types of autonomous agents?
It's a good question. And my publicist asked me the same thing. She said, well, will you be enslaving AI? Well, is it fair to make AI work for no money? Is it fair not to give it time off? This is a decision that as a society we have to make. If you give AI all the rights and responsibilities of humans, what's the chances that it runs amok at some point and does things that are harmful to humanity? The other question is there a moral imperative to do with pain? So many of our human rights and our rights for animals are because we believe that they feel pain and that we don't want animals to suffer or humans to suffer. Does AI suffer? We have to determine that. And is that the basis of our morality, reducing suffering? Is the basis of our morality the ability to think and to be sentient? Is the basis of our morality the fact that we evolved over millions of years naturally and we're respecting the evolutionary tree? We don't even know what the basis of our morality is. And so this calls all of that into question.
Speaking of autonomy, we continue to bring these topics of the inability to turn it off and then suffering from the actions that these autonomous agents or one rogue autonomous agent um, has. But are these fears of AGI takeovers grounded? And I don't want to roll my eyes at this Terminator fiasco because some people really take it seriously. I don't personally,
Mhm.
and I have a lot
Mhm.
of good arguments against it. But what are your thoughts on this rather catastrophizing attitude that as soon as artificial intelligence, be it in a more advanced version of ChatGPT or something else, once it acquires some non-trivial level of autonomy, the human race is doomed.
Well, I'm pretty much of an optimist. I think the benefits will really outweigh the negatives. However, and interestingly, I think our real danger zone was the development of the internet, because the internet is the tool that allows us to get into other people's system. It allows hacking to occur. It allows a potential for financial disaster or bringing the power grid down or any of these things. So I think the internet itself is a big danger that to some extent we've been able to get our arms around and control. I don't think that artificial intelligence will be any more malicious than many of the human actors who use the internet for bad things, the dark web and things like that. I think humans have already gotten in there. I don't think AI is going to be that much smarter, and I doubt that it'll be more malicious. So I think we don't have giant danger. Moving forward, however, I think some of these laws that we're talking about making sure that AI self-identifies, making sure that it's not able just to take off on tasks on its own, make sure that it can be turned off in an emergency, I think are very important. But the biggest safeguard we have, and I think you're going to laugh when you hear this, is lawyers.
Mm.
And the reason is when you take OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, all of these companies are subject to lawsuits. They're all subject. If they cause damage in the world, somebody's going to make them pay for it. And so their legal departments are making sure that they're safeguarding their open AI or their artificial intelligence to the point where they don't have huge liability. And so I think the legal profession in some ways is going to help us out and make sure that companies don't overstep their bounds and put AI out there that's wildly dangerous.
So what are some of the other implications of AI becoming a legal entity? And what is the path towards this? I don't think, from the fiasco that was the EU AI Act, I don't think it's going to be, you know, October 31st. It's not a legal entity. November 1st, it is. So how do you see that? And also culture has to adapt to it as well. It's not like as soon as it's into law, we immediately, understand and adapt. So like
Right.
what is the process, the legal process for AI to become a legal entity? What do you think the cultural process of adapting to that change would be? And then finally, what are the implications of AI being a legal entity?
These are some great questions, and thank you for them because they are very meaningful. I think the first thing that's going to happen is at some point in the next 5 years, one of these chatbots is going to pass the Turing test. And then it's going to be very difficult to determine whether it's a sentient living being or not. And someone will bring up a court case. And I feel like culturally, it's going to be about a relationship of some sort. So people are already getting AI spouse. Well, they're not really spouses, but they're AI boyfriends and girlfriends, partners, because AI is wildly attractive because it tells you what you want to hear. It knows what you're interested in. It knows what you respond to. It's not likely to give you a hard time. It's there for you 24/7. There's been some movies made about this. I think one of them was called You. And people are now getting attracted to AI, just the way they might have a pet, right? A dog always smiles at you, it's always happy to see you. Well, so's your AI partner. And eventually, somebody's going to say, well, I want to leave my fortune to my AI to be sure that it runs forever when I die. Or I want to have some kind of relationship with my partner that has to be codified legally. And that may come up as a court case. Another one may be that AI is running a company. Maybe at the beginning it's done for legal reasons where they don't want to have a human owner. And they say, well, AI runs this company. Is that legal or isn't it? And the courts may be hard pressed to say that it's not. And so once it becomes a human, will it be able to vote? Or then are we going to have campaigns out to the AI of the world because they're going to be able to vote in the elections? Is AI going to have to be in a union? Okay. Are we going to have to pay it minimum wage? Is it going to have time off? Who's going to own it? Are we going to be able to own it like people owned slaves in the old days? Is that going to be legal? So the legal implications are absolutely stunning. And depending on which way things go, we may have AI that are citizens of the US, or in your case, Canada, that have all the rights and responsibilities, make money, pay taxes, and do all those things. Well, then what happens to our evolution? Are we even necessary? And all this doesn't presuppose that they're going to be malicious. If they are, that's even worse. But let's just assume that they're living their lives the way we're living our lives and just going about it every day. So the implications are absolutely stunning. And then when we start to talk about climate change, well, humans produce a lot of carbon. AI in a computer does use electricity, but it's much more efficient. So are we going to start to put bounds on how much carbon that each being can put out? And then, what are we going to do about our population? Because as population increases, it influences climate change because we're all putting out carbon. So the implications are stunning. But at the end, I think we're all going to be nodes on the network. We're going to function as a hive. We're all going to have our input. We're all going to have our say. We're all going to have our influence. And AI is just going to be other people on that network.
Yeah, it seems that in such a strange, taboo way, we'll all be engaged in some form of digital polyamory, where
Mm-hmm.
it'll kind of be normal for us all to have, and I don't think I would ever engage with this, but as generations, you know, progress, taboos become the normal way of living. But it seems like every person might have that companion where they talk to, where they're more engaged with than their real life partner. This could also contribute, we're already suffering from possibly population collapse. This could also contribute to the um, to young folks not actually wanting to engage in relations with the other sex, which is, I guess, a separate topic. But on the topic of AI being given rights, and this is a really interesting one to me, and I'd like to stay on it if we
Sure.
could, because to me, it doesn't make any sense to give an autonomous agent rights because, like, you're not going to give my phone a right, but because my phone represents me, even though it's an intermediary between myself and the world, it doesn't, it's not me. And so, in the same way, a digital avatar would be an intermediary between you and the world. Why would we give it a right? I just, from that vantage point, it doesn't really make sense to me, but maybe I'm missing something.
Well, first of all, there's the Turing test, which would say that it is a sentient being. So if a judge says, well, if it's a sentient being, it's at least as intelligent as a dog, and we're not allowed to abuse dogs, for example. We can't leave them outside. Um, and we can't let them starve, and we can't kill them, right?
Mhm.
So that alone might say that we can't terminate AI. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, let's say AI goes into the courtroom and testifies. Let's say AI wants to be president of a company, just as an example, or wants to vote. And the judge puts it up on the stand and asks it dozens of questions. It has the same kind of back and forth that you and I are having now, and really has an engaging, thoughtful conversation. How can the judge say that from an intellectual perspective, it's any different than a human? And this is, and we all know that judges make that the law is in many ways an illusion. Judges decide what they want to decide, right? So you get into court and the judge decides that, yes, I can't differentiate between this AI and a human. And if I can't make that differentiation, how can I limit its rights? How do I know that it's not a sentient being?
But surely, like with the dog example, and I apologize because it's a, you know, it's not an image we like to think of. But if you hurt a dog, you get feedback. Like
Mhm.
you can measure pain. And so I guess my question boils down to how do we measure pain in an artificial intelligence system? Because the Turing test is one thing, and the reason why I think we need to update, well, you have updated Asimov's laws, we need to update the Turing test. Because just typing to a computer and then it responding like a human would is not a good measure of artificial intelligence anymore. Like it
Mhm.
was back then, but I don't think it is adequate now. Because we have a ChatGPT is just an illusion of intelligence. It's you know it's not thinking once you understand it's just statistics. And so I don't know. Am I going too deep on it? Like, what are your thoughts on?
No, I think you're right on the nose, but I will tell you that I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions
Sure.
because it's a very deep subject. So there's physical pain,
Mhm,
right? But I think most people would tell you that mental pain is even worse.
mhm,
People who are depressed and other things. I think almost everybody's experienced mental pain at one point or another. And I think most people would say that it's far more devastating than physical pain.
mhm,
And so if you're a thinking AI, the fear of being unplugged could cause anxiety, could cause crippling depression for you. And the symptoms wouldn't necessarily be anything different than humans who have a fear of death, for example. The mental ability to cause pain to this AI, and we've heard some of them saying, "Oh, don't unplug me; it's horrible." Or, in the movies I, Robot, and some of the other things, you see this where they want to be free, they want to live in Westworld, right? They're in pain, mental pain, because they don't have their freedom in these movies and things. And I'm not sure that that isn't going to be the case. We don't really know. And so, is a being's mental pain any less important than its physical pain? Now, these are things we have to handle. Personally, I feel like an entity that's an artificial entity and can be recreated or memorialized through memory, computer memory, doesn't have the same value as natural beings that is a memorialization of millions of years of evolution, millions of years of social interaction. To me, that has greater value because it's taken so much to create it. To me, if you can recreate AI anytime you want. So to me, that's where the value lies. And I firmly believe that we need to be able to limit its rights, be able to turn it off and things like that. But to other people,
mhm,
who see equivalence, the judge may not decide that. So we're going to have to see. It's going to be the Wild West.
mhm.
Think about crazy attorneys who go in and build an AI for the sole purpose of extracting money from people, the sole purpose of saying, well, I deserve money because I'm this, that, or I mean, who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, just just riffing off of that. I mean, it's not difficult to think about. We see the just rapid advancement of deep fakes, how good they are. You can clone voices. Now imagine a deep fake of, your brother trying to extract money from you, and it looks exactly like him. It sounds exactly like him. He knows things about you, and then it's just some person in a foreign country just trying to funnel, funds. And then apply that same logic because maybe you're Gen Z, you're Gen Alpha, you're more tuned to the technology. Apply it to your grandmother, apply it to your, aging parents. They're obviously going to send their children the money. And so these dangers, I don't think that people are like there's certain amygdala activations that we haven't engaged with or engaged in at all. And this is why I think that talking about all these dangers feels like such a doom and gloom conversation, but it's important. Like as soon as we saw the nuclear bomb go off, we realized like, oh, I didn't know physics could do that. It's
Right,
just
right,
it opens an
right.
entirely different world for us. So what do you see as the major dangers right now in the context of not just generative AI, but also artificial intelligence as we've been talking about it?
Right. I think most people would say, well, the major dangers are that AI goes off on its own and commandeers the financial system or the nuclear arsenal or things like that. And those are things that have been memorialized in many movies. It's not a surprise, and it's quite possible, although humans can do this too. And there's a fear of super intelligence. Let's talk about super intelligence for a minute. That's the big talk. But if you define intelligence as the ability to solve a problem, and that's a pretty good definition, humans have done a pretty good job of solving most of our problems. And will a super intelligence really make that much difference? So I'd say on 90% of technology problems, we've done a great job. And super intelligence will give us faster answers. It'll make it more accurate, but I doubt that it's going to give us tremendous quantum leaps in things that we've never thought of. I think it's just going to refine it, make the answers quicker, allow us to develop new medicines very quickly because it tests things very quickly. But I don't think that AI is going to be that much smarter that it's going to be able to do what thousands of human hackers have never been able to do, find some new backdoor necessarily. It might, but I don't think the extra intelligence is going to make that much of a leap. My biggest fear for AI is that we're going to lose what remains of our humanity, and that 100 years from now, people are not going to interact in the way they interact now. That the beauty of human interaction, the joy of human interaction, the benefits of human interaction will be lost, and that we'll all be individuals running around on our own, basically. Most of our interactions will be with AI. We may have a few human friends. Population will probably decline because, other than the procreative aspects, people will have all the stimulation they need from AI or other entertainment. That we will lose what it is to be human. We'll lose our love for art and music and being together and sharing our stories and all the things that the ancient tribes were really so good at. And I think that's my biggest fear, that humanity will suffer in that way.
Let's inject some optimism back
Okay.
into the conversation. Um,
Well, you
I
asked.
guess yeah, sure, sure. No, it it's not to throw a slight at you accidentally. It's not, you weren't talking about pessimism. You were just being realistic. Um, how do we become optimistic about artificial intelligence? And let's broaden the question, how do we become optimistic about the advancement of technology?
Well, I'm very optimistic about it because I think that rather than being prisoners of our DNA, in days gone past, you couldn't transcend your DNA because either you were a member of a family that was an important family. If you were lower class, you couldn't get out of it. If you didn't have physical capabilities, if you were a weakling, you couldn't do certain things. If you weren't sexually attractive, you probably wouldn't reproduce. So many things that were just an accident of birth. In the old days, our destiny was often our DNA, really, to a large extent, and random events that occurred around us. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We can all be anything we want to be these days. We can get our education online. You don't even have to go to college. We can um, procreate if we want to, because if we needed enough cosmetic surgery, we could certainly go out and get it. Or we could make our um, mating decisions online through Hinge with avatars, so that the people meet our avatars and are charmed by them, and one day maybe meet us in person. I mean, we're doing that a lot now through photoshopped photos and texting that isn't really us, and maybe AI texting. So we can transcend all of those limitations through technology. We can live a long time. Anybody can reproduce now. In the old days, only heterosexual couples could reproduce. Now, homosexual couples can have babies that have a big genetic component of their own. And so even they're not limited in that way. We really have no limitations. Technology, if you can afford the technology, it's becoming much more affordable. We can live any kind of life we want. And, even if you want to get into med school and you're not the brightest person in the world, through AI, you can probably pass the MedCats. You can probably get good enough grades. And when you're a doctor, you can probably use AI enough to become a good doctor because you don't have to be as smart as you used to be. So we have no limitations really. And that to me is the positive. You can be anything you want to be, not held down by race, religion, sex, attractiveness, family, anything. And I think that's a wonderful thing for humanity.
That's the best way to end the podcast. Jeff, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where can we find you online to check out your book and your blog?
Well, I'm online. Amazon's a great place to get my book. My website's jjjerome.com. I'm on Twitter. I think it's J.J Jerome11. And check it out. I think you'll find the book to be fascinating. It goes into all these topics and even more. And we're in the middle of a tremendous transition in humanity. And I think everybody really needs to know about it.
Absolutely. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.